I'll never forget this really weird thing that happened a few Christmases ago. The circumstances weren't great. It was when we had all temporarily moved back to Lake Superior to be closer to Mom, those being her final few months and all. My sister and her new husband were staying in a rental, but my little brother and I slept at Mom's. It was obviously going to be a bleak holiday, but my brother-in-law was really making an effort to come through for us. He did his part to try and brighten our days. Mom really liked him too, and seeing her happy made me like the guy a little more. On Christmas Eve, my brother-in-law suggested a family hike through the surrounding wilderness. Mom and my sister were more than happy to stay home, and after some persuading on their end, they convinced my little brother to stay back with them. So, my brother-in-law and I headed out by ourselves. We hopped in the truck and began the short drive to the base of the hike. I remember that the weather that day was menacing. We drove down a long, flat, ice-covered road for a while, making small talk here and there. I had no problem spending one-on-one time with this guy. As a matter of fact, I was sort of hoping he'd be a little uncomfortable and start making a fool of himself to impress me or something, but the guy was cool as a cucumber the entire time. We pulled off the road and parked in an empty lot next to the trail sign. We grabbed our packs, made sure we were sufficiently bundled, and embarked on the hike. We were both silent for a while, just taking in the beauty of the frostbitten wilderness around us. After a while, though, a light snow began to fall, and soon the measly trail was covered. We couldn't exactly see the trail at this point, but we pressed on in the direction we had been going. After half an hour of trudging through the snow, I was getting a little ticked off. I can't place it now, but I remember feeling something awful for my brother-in-law, but only for a minute at least. Staring at the back of his head as we trudged through snow, I pushed the thoughts away. A little while later, he stopped in place, and I nearly ran into the back of him. All at once, something putrid filled the air, and there was no question, this smell was death. It must have been a decaying moose that got stuck somewhere and froze. Maybe there was another one close by. It was overwhelming. The death was larger than one dead moose. I suggested that the smell was coming from a dead animal, still facing the back of the guy's head. I didn't want to see his face. If he looked like he was going to puke, I was going to puke. "It's coming from over there," he said almost robotically, and he stepped off the trail we had been following. He began trudging into the thick wilderness to our right without turning to face me once. I called after him, but he just kept walking toward something. I weighed my options. I could either stand there in the rotten air by myself and wait for him to return, or I could follow him. I didn't want to be alone out there. By the time I made my mind up, he was several paces in front of me, and we were off the trail and it was snowing, so I couldn't exactly reach out and force him to stop. Whatever he was moving toward was bad. I couldn't only smell it, I could feel it. As we moved, the smell got unbelievably worse. It was as if we'd wandered onto an old dumping ground filled with decaying roadkill, but it was so much worse than that. A loud noise came from deeper in the woods, from what must have been the source of the awful stench. My brother-in-law sped up and outpaced me. I lost sight of him. I was terrified to be alone out there. The snow was really coming down now, and I asked myself why I ever agreed to go hiking in the middle of winter with this crazy guy. I was snapped out of my own thoughts when I saw it. I thought at first that I was looking at an animal deer legs and matching hooves, snowy and tussled. But then, my eyes moved up its body, and I couldn't even find it in myself to scream. The fur of the thing's deer hips curled in toward an emaciated abdomen and ribcage of a human. The skin was torn and stretched and mangled, with pieces of bloodless flesh hanging off. At the 7-foot mark, the skinless head of the creature stared straight at me, with glowing yellow eyes. It stood about 10 feet in front of me, towering above the snowdrifts around it. I saw its gummy lips pull back into an evil grin, revealing teeth as sharp as nails and a black tongue. The smell immediately got worse, and it started toward me. There was nowhere to go. I still can't believe what happened next. In comes my brother-in-law with a flare. Like a seasoned quarterback, he threw the lit flare straight at the beast. it bouncing off the thing's bony chest and onto the snow in between the two of us. As the flare's light intensified, the monster unleashed a piercing screech and arched its back. The evilness in its eyes became uncontainable, and it bolted into the wilderness, away from us. My brother and I didn't need to say anything to each other. We just ran back to the car, thanking our lucky stars that we made it out alive. We're still not sure if it was real or not, maybe just a winter-induced hallucination or something. But I know that whatever I stared into that day in the woods was a different sort of evil. I especially like when the stories are about unexplained occurrences and creatures in the woods. I think if anyone spends enough time in the outdoors, they'll eventually come across some strange things they can't explain. Whenever I sat around a campfire with my uncles as a kid, they'd tell me scary stories about things they saw in the forest. Almost everyone in my family owns property on the outskirts of the Finger Lakes National Forest. My backyard is just up against it. The forest sits on a ridge called the Backbone between Lake Seneca and Lake Cayuga. My family has been hunting and trapping the area for 5 or 6 generations. We joke that the forest is our ancestral lands because we have been here for so long. In the early spring, I hike up to the peak of the Backbone and set beaver traps along the streams that flow down into the lakes. My family used to make most of its money on beaver pelts at the turn of the century. Now it's just a hobby for us that's been passed down for generations. I'm actually an accountant by day. I'm sure my great-great-grandparents are horrified. I check my traps early every morning before I head into work. On days that I work from home, I'll sometimes check them again before sunset. Last season, I was walking my trap line before work when I saw some disturbing things. The traps that were triggered all had mostly eaten beaver carcasses in them. Blood, bone, and shredded beaver meat littered the rocks and weeds around the traps. It looked like someone shoved the bodies through a wood chipper. It was a grisly scene, but nothing so far from the ordinary that I should be spooked. Predators getting to your trap line is a regular problem. What did startle me about the situation was the scent left behind and the damage to the traps themselves. My traps are heat-treated steel, built for heavy use, but they still had massive gashes and dents in them. No animal, not even a bear, has enough power in its jaws to crumple steel like that. The traps had an oily coating on them that smelled like rancid meat. At first I thought it was the beaver carcasses, but the kills were too fresh to smell already. Whatever creature had ransacked my line left behind a distinct smell of musty, rotten meat. I talked to my uncles about the incident, and one of them reported a similar situation: ransacked traps and the smell of rancid meat. His trap line was not far from mine, so it was an easy jump to assume the same animal that destroyed my trap line did the same thing to his. This happened twice more, and we began to joke that a zombie bear was roaming the hills. We laughed about it, but I was starting to get spooked, and I could tell my uncles were too. We decided we needed to figure out what was going on. So we bought a bunch of trail cams and placed them around our traps. They were simple motion-activated cameras that would snap a picture if anything moved inside their field of vision. For a few weeks, we didn't see anything. It wasn't even beaver season anymore, but we kept throwing out traps anyway. I'm not advocating poaching, but we really wanted to find out what that thing was. Finally, one of our cameras caught something. I knew we had something before I even looked at the camera when I saw the ransacked trap. The familiar smell of rotting meat was present, and I found patches of hairy skin hanging from low branches and bushes. It looked like the creature's skin was molting off, like in those nature documentaries when the snakes shed out of their skin. I took the SD card out of the camera and nearly ran the whole way back to my car and sped home to see what was on it. The pictures weren't the best quality, but you could clearly make out a dog, wolf-like head with eyes glowing in the moonlight. But there was something wrong with the way it was built. It wasn't just that it was way too big to be a dog or coyote. It had a huge humped back and broad human-like shoulders, The camera was black and white, so I couldn't tell what color the creature was, but the picture was clear enough to see that the thick fur around its head and neck thinned out around the body to show light-colored, maybe gray skin underneath. There isn't much else I could tell from the first picture, but a succession of photos taken as the creature moved showed that it could even stand on its hind legs. I thought we had solid proof of a wolf-human hybrid. I sent the pictures to the Fish and Game Commission, the National Forestry Service, and some local news outlets. Nobody took it seriously. The local news was the only one to run the story, but they treated it as more of a joke. I'm not even angry about it, to be honest. I'd assume it was just Photoshop or something if I saw the pictures. A park ranger I knew took a look at the pictures and checked out the site of the traps with me, but he said it was probably a black bear with a bad skin infection, like mange, that was making it look and smell like that. But I've since become an expert on bear anatomy after obsessively trying to figure it out, and no bear is built like the creature I have pictures of. The legs and shoulders are too human-like. I still hunt and trap, but I always carry a rifle on me now, and I never spend the night in the trees. I was on my way to my uncle's funeral when I saw Bigfoot. It's funny because I probably wouldn't have even gone except that I hoped he'd leave me some money. Fat chance though, because he never had much, and if he did, his loser son would get it. But I thought it was worth a try, and even if he didn't, maybe his sister, my Aunt Sue, might give me a few bucks. I had to drive all the way to Ames from Cedar Rapids, where I live, and I wasn't sure my old truck was going to make it. There's a whole lot of nothing on that drive. It's not even interstate. You take State Highway 30 west. The worst thing on that truck was the tires, and that's what I learned when I blew one in the nothing between Cedar Rapids and Marshalltown. Scared the crap out of me when the truck dropped on the passenger side. I wrenched it off the road onto the shoulder. It was summer and pretty hot, so I was glad at least I'd broken down near a bunch of trees, a windbreak, I guess, for all the cornfields. I had a donut spare under the seat, but it was hell to get it out along with that cruddy little jack they come with. I grabbed the lug nut wrench and loosened the nuts before I started jacking up the truck. Just as I got it up and pulled off the tire, I heard a car stop in front of mine. At this point, I didn't care because I'd already done the hard part, so I ignored it and kept putting the donut on. I heard boots scrape on the pavement and looked up to see this big guy. I didn't like the look of him. He had greasy hair and a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth. "You need some help?" he said. "No thanks, I got it," I said. "Good," he said. "'Cause I'm not gonna help you. I'm gonna rob you." "Oh, come on, man," I said. "I got $10 in my pocket for gas and that's it." He grabbed my hair and pulled. I had no choice. I had to stand up. He was right in my face with his nasty meat breath. "I got nothing," I said. "You got $10. I want it," he said. I was reaching into my pocket when I heard a whooping yell. We both looked toward the sound. I thought at first that I was looking at a dude in a gorilla suit, but there was no way. It was too believable and not quite gorilla-like either. Besides, no one is that tall. That thing had to be 10 feet at least. It was barefoot, and its feet were huge and hairy. Really, what it looked like more than a gorilla was one of those drawings of prehistoric humans, only bigger. I just couldn't get over the size. And it had hair, or bear-like fur, really, all over except for its face. It glared at us with its black eyes, almost as if we'd woken it up, and then it yelled again. Not words like pre-words, like it was learning to talk. It was angry, though, anyone could see that. And then it started to walk toward us. The dude who was trying to rob me looked scared as hell. He stared at it like he was frozen, and then he ran to his car and left, peeling out like he was running from the law. I would have gone too, except that donut tire wasn't on yet, but I had a feeling that the thing didn't want to hurt me. Still, I would have at least gotten in my truck if I could have. I couldn't, so I just looked at the thing. It stood there until the car was out of sight. Then it looked at me, and I could have sworn it was wondering if I needed help. We looked at each other and I said, "Thanks," even though I knew it couldn't hear me. and probably wouldn't understand me if it did hear me. I went back to putting my tire on, and by the time I finished, it was gone. I went over to where I'd seen it, just looking to see if I could find any tracks or anything. I smelled a little urine, but that was all. When I got to the next town, I decided to get lunch. The funeral wasn't until late afternoon, and if I got there early, I'd just have to listen to the same old stories I'd heard 100 times. I went to a little diner in Marshalltown and ordered an egg salad sandwich and apple pie. I asked the waitress if she'd heard of any Bigfoot sightings in the area. I wasn't sure if she thought I was crazy at first because she looked really surprised, but then she said, "Yeah, why?" I shrugged and said, "Just wondering." She stood with her hand on her hip. "Okay, fine. I think I saw him," I said. "Where?" she asked. "On 30, I said. "A few miles back." She asked, "Did you get a picture?" Idiot that I was, I hadn't even thought of that. I said, "No." She shook her head like she didn't believe me, or she thought I was an idiot. I continued on to Ames and went to the funeral. My cousin gave a speech about how funny his dad was. He used to claim that he played for the New York Giants, which was a lie, and loved to play pranks on people like putting a cup of water on the top of doorways. On the way home, I went by the spot where I'd seen Bigfoot. I pulled over and sat in the truck for a while to see if he'd come. He didn't, and it started to get dark, so I left. I thought I would tell you about my experience here since everybody else seems to think I'm making it up. I guess I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I wouldn't have been if it wasn't for Dawn. I wouldn't even really call her my friend. I didn't have friends because my parents had turned me into such a neurotic person. She filled some gap where friends should have been. And she was the kind of person who was naturally always looking for trouble. And I was easy to manipulate. She came up to me one day when we were in high school and asked if I wanted to go smoke. I didn't. But the thought of not being alone at lunchtime was too irresistible, I guess. I'm sure she sensed I was easy prey since I had no boundaries. After that first joint, I just went along with whatever harebrained idea she had. I don't really know why she wanted me around. I guess having a sidekick can come in handy. She had a knack for finding out where the outsiders were hanging out, and we would hang there too. All the party houses in Cincinnati became our territory. She was determined to stay high as a kite the majority of the time. And she was obsessed about this 5-pound bag of pot she had left behind in Tucson, Arizona. Dawn and one of her friends had stolen it a while back. I don't know the details, but she had left it with her hairdresser friend who was hiding it in her freezer. I can't make this stuff up, even if everyone thinks I can. We had no way of getting to Tucson, so we started out hitchhiking. It was slow going, and Dawn got frustrated and said we had to go to a truck stop. She said that was the way to find a long-distance ride. We found a driver who said he could take us as far as St. Louis, so we took him up on it. That sounded like a good long stretch. He said he had to make a drop-off somewhere in downtown St. Louis near the Arch, and then he could help us find a ride further west. Even though I thought Dawn was crazy, it was exciting to be on the road. I had never been west of the Mississippi, and it did give me a feeling of adventure. The trucker was telling us that he liked having company on the road because he was prone to getting white line fever. We didn't know what that was. He said when someone drives for too long, they can start staring at the white lines on the road and get hypnotized by them. It only happened when he was really tired, but the trucking lifestyle didn't include regular sleep hours. And sometimes he'd space out so much he wouldn't remember a whole stretch of road he'd driven. So having us along for the ride was helping him too. I had always wanted to do more traveling, even though that wasn't the way I had pictured it. When I was a kid, I would hear people at school always talking about the trips they had taken. The trucker said he had been all over the United States and had met a lot of interesting people. I was sitting by the window and looking out at the stars. It was really late. Dawn was talking the driver's ear off. She always had a lot to say. I guess that's just what he needed. I got really tired and just fell asleep. When I woke up, we were in some kind of warehouse area. Dawn was asleep beside me, and someone outside of the truck was yelling. I looked out of the windshield, and the truck driver was out there pointing up at something and just freaking out and saying, "Oh my God." I got out and went over to him, and he's like, "It landed up there, up on the top." I didn't see anything. I started wondering if that white line fever thing he'd been talking about was affecting him. I was looking up and staring at the St. Louis Arch. It was beautiful. I had never seen such a thing. They had it all lit up at night, and it was just glowing so brightly. The trucker was shouting, "We have to get somebody. That thing is huge." I did not know what he was talking about. The arch? The arch was huge. And then I saw something creeping down from the top. As soon as I saw it, I got the real heebie-jeebies. It was something unnatural. It was moving like an insect, but it was gigantic. It kept stopping every now and then and spreading out what looked like big black wings. It would shake them out and then fold them back up and come down a little farther. Since the arch was lit up, it was actually pretty easy to see it once you spotted it. At a certain point, it seemed to sense us watching it. It turned its head toward us, and I saw these glowing red eyes. It sounds crazy, but I know what I saw. By that time, the trucker was speechless, and we were both just staring at it. Then it let go of the arch and just seemed to start gliding through the air toward us. That red stare was really intense. Me and the trucker turned around and ran to the truck and locked the doors. He got that big truck turned around and out of there incredibly fast. He drove, and we didn't talk until we were all the way out of town. Dawn had finally woken up and was confused as hell. Me and the trucker were still shaking and trying to make sense of what we saw. There was no way to explain it. The creepiest thing ever. When I was in my last year of college, I got a placement at a hospital where I worked with professionals on the adolescent psych ward. The director and I would do crafts and projects with the teens to help them have an outlet while they were getting treatment. We dealt with a lot of mental illness and other medical issues. Every day before we'd see the teens, we'd get a rundown explaining who everyone was and what issues they were being hospitalized for. This one night we were given the usual report, and the nurse mentioned one teen in particular. This girl, who I'll call Joni, had all of a sudden just stopped talking and started to act really out of character. She wouldn't respond to family, friends, doctors, or anyone. She was hospitalized because they became concerned about her harming herself, and they were trying to ensure she was being watched 24/7. They were worried that she was experiencing some type of psychosis. From what I was told, they had checked and ruled out a brain tumor and other possible physiological causes and found nothing abnormal. This was a very old hospital with dark hallways, poorly lit rooms, and the creepiest atmosphere I've ever experienced. It looked like a hospital you'd see in a horror movie. When I walked down the hallways, I remember always being scared something would jump out at me because there were a lot of blind spots because of its very old layout. Anyway, this night in particular, the director and I were getting things together for the residents in the kitchen room where we always did our activities. I was sitting close to Joni and tried to initiate a conversation, but she would just stare at me blankly. The director tried as well, and Joni would not respond. Every now and then she would just look at us and laugh loudly or smile at me with glassy eyes. The doctors had tried all day to get her to speak, and she had said nothing, so I just chatted and tried my best to include her, even though she wouldn't really engage. I started to doodle on a piece of paper while talking with some of the other teens. On my paper, I just randomly wrote down "hi" and drew a design around it, not even really thinking about what I was doing. Almost immediately after I wrote "hi," Joni picked up a pencil and wrote "hello." I was shocked to say the least. I was the first person in days that she attempted to communicate with. I didn't know if it would work, but I wrote "how are you?" and she actually wrote an answer. I was blown away. We exchanged a couple questions and answers. Within a few minutes, this girl and I had written almost a page of conversation, and she was communicating through writing with no trouble. I couldn't believe it was happening. I was getting all this info from a girl that everyone thought was unreachable. We communicated through writing for what seemed like hours, but was probably just about 1 hour. While I was asking her how she was feeling about being in the ward, she admitted through writing that she was scared. I kept going, trying to see if she was scared because she was in a strange place or missed her family or what. But she wrote that it was because she saw people in the room with us. Obviously, there were people in the room with us, so I asked why the people in the room scared her. She wrote, "Because they are dead." I swear, when I read that, it felt like my stomach hit the floor. I looked up from the page we were writing on, and she just looked at me and then turned her head and stared at the door. No one was there. I mean, I didn't see anyone there. Joni stared at that door for at least a minute, and I swear she saw something there. I was more freaked out than I can even express. I'll never forget the look on her face. Whether or not there was something there, Joni could definitely see someone. I tried to relax, and once I got her attention back, we started communicating again through writing. We talked this way until 9 p.m., when my shift was over. She said that the dead people kept their distance from her when other people were around. But when she was in bed at night, they surrounded her and warned her not to ever speak or they'd take her away. When I was leaving, I thanked Joni for speaking to me. I collected the papers we had written on, and I showed the entire conversation to the director and the nurse in charge. Everyone on duty was freaked out by what it said. They assured me that the pages would be passed along to the psychiatrist the next morning. I was filled with so many emotions. I was happy I had spoken to her, and she was honest with me, but I was really scared and shaken up. I got home, and I remember walking into the living room, and my roommates knew right away something was wrong. I was shaking and blurted out everything that happened. They were supportive, but also freaked out by the situation. I've never been happier to have roommates. If I'd gone home to an empty place, I probably wouldn't have slept at all. Sadly, because of the schedule I had and all the different shift changes at the hospital, I never saw Joni again and never found out what the final diagnosis was for her. I still get the chills when I think about the look on her face that night when she stared at the door. I don't think I will ever shake that feeling. I just hope she got the help she needed.